Hello and welcome back, my partners in crime. Welcome back to Murder Analysed for another true crime. Now this crime is a 2018 crime. It's from UK. The murder was committed on the early hours, I think about 7:30 AM on the 23rd of December 2018. Now the perpetrators in this case were Neil Maxwell and Luke Pearson. Now the reason I've called this case, I suppose, the killers of Benefit Street, is because Neil Maxwell was like this lovable rogue that was portrayed on this TV documentary show, real life show. It's like the Kardashians but on benefits, if you see what I mean. So this is what it was sort of portraying. 90% of this street that these people came from, this area, 90% of them were unemployed. Now, not through any fault of their own, most of them, because this is an area of Britain that was, hard done by, I suppose. There was no money around, and there's no jobs around, and there's no infrastructure in these cities and these towns and these places where these people come from. So they found themselves on a benefit. And this was a Channel 4 show that literally showed the life of people on benefits. And this was filmed from about 2015, I think, sort of time. And Neil Maxwell was in, I think, season 2 of that. But he was portrayed as this lovable rogue, as I said. But, this man was a sadistic, horrible man, really. And they also sort of nicknamed him the King of Kids. Now, when we talk about the King of Kids, this man, when he was sentenced, actually, for the murder of Lee Cooper, this poor man that was murdered by these pair in 2018, he was 40-year-old. So the King of Kids. And if you look at his co-defendant, Luke Pearson, he was only 19 at the time. So this Neil Maxwell, portrayed himself as the King of Kids. He was a grown man. He was a grown man. So there's a lot to this case as we go through this case. As I said, it was a horrific murder of this poor gentleman, Lee Cooper. It was uncalled for, really. But when we look at the history of Neil Maxwell, and we look at his background and how he come up, this drug smoking, cannabis smoking, I think he was on crack and everything else, it was said here. How he was even abusive to his girlfriends and stuff like that. And then from 5 AM that morning, he had also attacked 2 other people, leading up now to where he then got hold of Lee Cooper and killed him. Now, I have got some CCTV footage within this case, and it shows where Neil has been arrested, because at the time when he was arrested, Lee Cooper was still alive. So it looked like, and he thought that he would be on a charge of probably GBH. This was this man's mentality. But also in this CCTV footage in the police station, you will see how his persona changes once he finds out that Lee Cooper is dead. And now he faces a murder charge. And now this man, this 40-year-old man, I'm going to keep saying he's 40 because it's really relevant here, the lifestyle that this man was portraying. He was just a fuck. He really was. And he deserved for the life imprisonment that he got. Now, Luke Pearson was with him on that day throughout these crimes and previous crimes in that morning that they had tried to assault, or they had assaulted people. And in the end, Liz got 24 years. For that. Liz's defence at that time was diminished responsibility. But you've got to think, when you do these sort of murders in front of many, many people in a crowded street, really, of this area that is usually full of children and full of everybody else. There was witnesses that were distraught at trying to stop this murder as it was going on. And as we go into the details of this, how Lee was murdered, it's really shocking, really, to think that these people thought that they could do this in front of residents in this area and think that nothing was going to happen to them. So it's about the mentality of that. And actually, I suppose when we look at it, how we think this Neil Maxwell must have been thinking, because he thought he was a star. You know, he had 15 minutes of fame really on this, you know, Benefit Street program, and it went to his head. Now on this Benefit Street program, he also would show on TV, live TV, his marijuana grows. He would also talk and openly take drugs on this show. He was fiery, so he would sometimes be quite aggressive and shout and stuff like this on that show, but still came across as this lovable rogue, really. But it was outside of that show, what was really going on outside in these areas that this man thought he was a king of, really portrays what he really was. So, you know, he had his 15 minutes of fame, and now he's spending 30 years in prison for a murder, horrific murder of Lee Cooper. And this is really what this case is about. So let's have a look at the background really of this man, because the mentality of this man really. So he was this self-styled, wasn't he, king of kids, this is what he used to say to people. And he had a flat actually, and this was in Stockton-on-Tees. And it was on this estate, or Artillery estate, I think, in Stockton-on-Tees at that time. And they were lots of kids, and I mean lots of kids, because in this area, the crime rate in this area is like most estates and areas throughout the UK, especially around this time, and even now, to tell you the truth. Lots of antisocial behaviour and stuff like this goes on these estates. Now, this estate was no different than probably any other estate. But when you start to see him on this TV program, he had really lots of kids, even before that TV program, congregating outside his flat and stuff like that. It was a place where he encouraged kids to come, and also he was selling drugs and taking drugs and God knows what else, and stolen goods, and he was promoting this actually throughout the whole time. So his mentality is showing that yes, he's an older man, but he was definitely hanging around with very young children and influencing them kids to do things, really, to tell you the truth, criminal things. And he seemed to be empowered by this, you know. He didn't have a lot else. I think he was a warehouse worker at one point, and then he wasn't, you know, as I said, there wasn't a lot of jobs in this area, but mainly he was on Benefit Street because he was claiming a benefit. So that's why he was on there. So he had this flat at that time. At the time of his arrest, actually, he had no fixed abode, so he either didn't pay his rent or he was thrown out, probably because of the antisocial behaviour that he was causing within this flat. And so then he went on to, as I said, no fixed abode, which means he had no address at the time of his arrest that was a permanent address, meaning he was probably on the streets or sleeping, you know, what they call sofa surfing, or just staying in people's houses at the time of his arrest. So let's think about this Maxwell. So by the time the show aired in May 2015, he was also, by this stage, a cocaine addict as well. So, you know, listen, we're not saying that cocaine will make you go and do all these crimes, but the mentality of this man, on top of the drugs this man took and everything else, you know, and he was terrorising actually this neighbourhood as well. If you did something wrong or whatever, he sort of thought he could come along and sort of dictate to you what to do. People were a bit scared of him, mainly the younger kids in this area, and because of the following he had. But when this aired in May 2015, all of a sudden, this boy didn't have just the youths that were looking up to him in the street. He now made quite an impact actually on the TV, because he was this outgoing, lovable rogue. And I suppose it gives us, these programs, an insight, doesn't it, how to other people live. And that's what it was meant to be, like a fly on the wall sort of look into these lives of these people. So he did gain lots of fans at that time. And I think this is also what made this boy think he was untouchable, because of his 15 minutes of fame from this program. It's, you know, fame can do some funny things to you, but I think this boy was always, probably from when he was born, was on a downhill run and would always have ended up in prison for one reason or another. This wasn't his first stint in prison, this murder. He'd already served time before for other things, like assault and stuff, with a deadly weapon. He was well known at that point, even behind the scenes of this 2015 TV show, that he was also really known to use a Stanley knife to slice people. That was his mark that he used to like to leave. So if you disrespected him or you did something he didn't like, he would attack you with a Stanley knife, and he would cause you some serious damage and leave long-lasting effects on your life, because a Stanley knife is not a thing that can be sewn up that easily without leaving lots of scarring. So this man was already known to be very, very violent. So I think at this time as well, he'd just either finished a 2.5-year sentence for a knife wound. I think he attacked someone in this block of flats that he had lived in, and I think it was a 24 centimetre long slice that he had done. I think he sliced the person 3 times with his Stanley knife, and he got 2.5 years. No, it's not enough. What deterrent is that really when we're talking about, knife crime? But I suppose as knife crime has become more prevalent in the last few years, and sentences are meant to be getting harsher, more harsher than the 2.5 years, and he wouldn't have served 2.5 years, would he? He would have served about 9 months maybe for that, if that really, when you think about it. But this is the sort of character that was going on behind the scenes. But this man, even though he had this, was still given this role on this TV show because they just really didn't know enough about him to really understand that he was actually quite a nasty piece of work. So again in 2016, after the programme had aired and he'd done his little stint, to make him come across as this lovable rogue on this Channel 4 programme, he then served, I think, another 2.5 years for a serious brutal attack then on his former lover. So he was a, domestic violence abuser as well, right? This man is everything. He had no respect for women. He had no respect for the community he lived in. He had no respect for children. He had no respect for anyone, actually. To tell you the truth, I don't think the bloke had much respect for himself, really. But, 2.5 years, again, he gets, and I think there was a lot of things in this where he threw stuff at her and hit her and stuff like this in this attack on this young girl. But again, we have, don't we, a man that has gone inside and served another 2.5 years, probably another 9 months, been released out, back onto the streets, thinking he's really untouchable. We keep putting these criminals in and out, don't we, of prison, but we don't really do anything significant to them. So this man's already attacked someone with a knife. A Stanley knife is a deadly weapon. It's a very serious weapon, and he should have got longer than that. I think now the minimum for knife crime should be 7 years just for holding that knife, let alone using it and causing GBH and ABH on someone. And then we have him now, just after this show's aired in 2016, so it hadn't been out long at all, from 2015 to 2016. Now a brutal attack on a woman, a brutal attack on his ex-lover, a woman. So this is the real character of this lovable rogue from this Channel 4 TV documentary, Benefit Street. Shocking, really. And this boy had, as I say, quite a lot of fans. His defence for the crime of this brutal attack on his girlfriend at that time, or ex-partner or ex-lover, whatever you want to call it, was that he was high on spice. Right, now we all know about spice, and we all know what spice can do and everything else. Plus there was a mixture, I think, of everything else that he was taking. Right, but it's not an excuse when you're going to have, commit violence towards people to say that you are taking some drug or whatever. It's just not a defence. But of course, they must have listened to him to have only given him 2.5 years. He was meant to also push his ex-partner down the stairs, swung her around by her hair, threw a television at her. Literally threw the television at her. If it had hit her, that would have done some serious damage. And I think in the next case, when we look at his next crimes that he's done, a TV stand and that even come into that one. And this was in a home that they shared together. So again, it probably wasn't his home, it was her home. And that's probably why now on these next lot of murders that this man had no fixed abode, because he shouldn't have been there, it wasn't his property. So he says, when the woman tried to climb out the window, Maxwell pulled her back, pushing her face down before throwing a car seat at her. Now, a car seat, when we talk about a car seat, you're talking about children, aren't you? Within this household, really, of this violence, with spice and God knows what else, you know, is going on in this household. Anyway, he's thrown the car seat at her, and then he poured a can of pineapple juice over her head, and that's what the court heard. So listen, he was brutal in this attack. It doesn't read as brutal as it is, but if you are a woman and you have experienced domestic violence from a man that is high on spice and everything else that he's putting into his body, because he's already shown you on this show how much he takes of cocaine and marijuana and anything else he can get in his body. Now he's mixing in some spice because it's cheap. Let's be honest, that's why most of them are on it, because it's cheap. It can also really cause you to have some real issues when it comes to controlling what you do. Give him that. But even so, you know, it's not an excuse to hurt people, is it? Don't take spice, really. Don't take drugs. If you can't handle what it's doing to you, stop taking it. That's my advice to anybody that thinks that spice is a good thing to take. It is not. It's life destroying, and in the end it will kill you, really, or kill somebody else because of the effects that it has. So yes, this car seat was thrown at her, the TV was thrown at her, you know, he's dragged her around the room by her hair, and he's been then arrested for that. But then we have to talk about Maxwell, how one of his excuses, right, not only because he's on the drugs, but why he's taking more drugs. He says he's ramped up his drug taking because of the fame from this TV show, right, this Channel 4 documentary, because he's famous. You know, it's hard to handle, isn't it, being famous? It's ramped it up. You know, he was quite happy to go out there and, you know, get the drugs and do everything else and take them, but, you know, he needed to take more because of the fame that he had got was affecting him. Okay, I mean, you've got to think that this man from start to finish, and you'll see this through the case of the murder of Lee Cooper, is a bullshitter, right? He's going to come out with loads of different things to try and save himself, and there's always an excuse, and it's never Neil Maxwell's fault. There's always something else that's at fault here, and now he's trying to blame this TV, you know, show for making him take more drugs, and that's what made him take more drugs and then literally attack the girlfriend. So let's talk about this extensive rap sheet before all this. Okay, he was charged with assault and false imprisonment. He's also got, I think, robbery, fraud, resisting arrest, dealing drugs, which we know he did because he was even doing that on the TV show. This is how blatant this man was. Shining like laser pens and stuff at police and helicopters. That's now illegal and you shouldn't be doing it. It's very dangerous, these pilots, to have these sort of things shown in their face. We don't have much of that then, but you can see this man, his mentality. Now this isn't a kid we're talking about. I keep coming back to his age. He would have been 35, 36, 37, 38 at around this time. This is not a child. This is not a delinquent. Well, he is a delinquent. He's but an adult delinquent. So I'm trying to build you the background of this man so you can understand his mentality when he attacked Lee Cooper in the way that he did. So now let's really talk about how this crime, the murder charge, now comes about. So it was December 23rd, just before Christmas. I think it was 2018. Now, there had been some issues, right, with Lee Cooper and some other people, and Lee Cooper, it was alleged that he had, or he was one of many people that were starting trouble and you know, attacking sort of people living in this Stockton hotel. Right now, some of these people that were living in this hotel, and these would have been probably either homeless people or, you know, waiting for accommodation and stuff like that in this hotel. Now, Lee Cooper and others were meant to be sent in or treating these people with some disrespect. That was what was alleged by Neil Maxwell. Now, as I say, with Neil Maxwell was a bloody liar, and you can't believe, because he's just going to say anything really to get out of this murder charge. Then you have to think this when we talk about Lee Cooper. I'm not saying Lee Cooper was a great bloke. I don't know him, but whatever someone does, you don't deserve to be murdered in the way that he was murdered. So I'm going to read you some texts now, okay, which came from, and there is some, profanities in there, I suppose, because this is the way these people spoke to each other. So after hearing that Lee Cooper was among these men that had attacked a friend living at this Stockton hotel, he sent a message saying that I will put a blade straight through your scatty effing Lee, right? Meaning that we already know that Neil Maxwell used to like to use Stanley knives to attack people, and he was already threatening then to attack Lee Cooper with this blade because of the and we have to say allegations, because even though I think Lee Cooper was arrested and he was released at 1 a.m. that morning for this, because now he's dead, that case couldn't go ahead. So we didn't really know the full situation. This is why I'm saying alleged, right? Because it has to be alleged, because Lee Cooper is no longer around to answer any charge that may have come from that assault or anything else with others to what part he took in it. But Neil Maxwell took it upon himself to make sure that he singled out Lee Cooper from amongst others, and that he was then going to attack him with a knife. So it was already said. Now, Lee Cooper was 43 at the time. As I said, we have this man who is about 39, 40 now, right? So these two men, right, Neil and Lee, were actually about the same age. We're not talking about children, we are now talking about grown men. But as I said, Lee Cooper is no longer here. He was arrested, I think, for that assault, but bailed at 1 a.m. in the morning, and really that was then the end of it for Lee Cooper, because the minute Lee Cooper was assaulted and murdered later on in that morning, he couldn't answer any questions. So therefore we cannot say that Lee Cooper actually did attack anybody, because he's not here to defend himself, is he? He's just not. So we can't say that. So as I've said, I don't know whether Lee Cooper was an upstanding member of society, but it shouldn't matter if he was or not. He didn't deserve to die in the way that he was murdered. So again, about 5:30 a.m, so we have Lee Cooper now being released from the police cells at 1 a.m. At 5:30 a.m. in the morning, maybe they live a different lifestyle to me, Maxwell's injured friend, so Neil's injured friend, I think this one from the Stockton hotel, was in the town centre, and he was chased down in that town centre by Lee Cooper, and heard someone shout, "That's the man that grassed you up." Now, grassed you up means he's rung the police, hasn't he? And Lee Cooper's been arrested that morning, so now they're chasing him down. But within minutes, Neil Maxwell, with cocaine and cannabis in his system, really, was literally on a warpath. He had heard all this going on, the texts were sort of coming through. He is now coked out of his head with marijuana and anything else he decided to take. We know he likes spice and anything he could get his hands on. And he decided, do you know what? Enough's enough. I'm going to sort this out, because I'm the king of these streets. I'm famous, for my 15 minutes of fame on Benefit Street, and I'm going to hunt down Lee Cooper, and I'm going to show him, really, probably slice him up, give him a good hiding, really, and probably do another 2 years and get out, because that was the normal for him. This is what he's thinking in his mind. It's normal, isn't it? How these people run their lives, I don't know. So we have to think, right? He's had all these text messages, they're up late at night, now there's early hours in the morning. Now he's on this rampage, but what he doesn't do is just go for Lee Cooper, because he can't find him, probably, is one of the reasons why he didn't attack him that early in the morning. But this 2-hour rampage, he gets hold of Luke Pearson, this 19-year-old, one of his little mates that he can control, and they attack this Matthew Elsley. Now, they slash him across the back, and really it maimed him for life, didn't it? Because again, this man, as I keep saying to this Neil Maxwell loves to use blades, he loves to use Stanley blades, and he loves to leave his mark. So you know, don't do it again, don't upset him again, or else you're going to be marked for life. Now, they slashed him across the back, the man got away, and really, and then I think who else did they attack? They attacked another bloke, I think, and I think his name was James Jogger. But there was no apparent reason for that. So they was on this rampage, right? The rampage has started. So it wasn't just about Lee, was it? It couldn't have been, because you've attacked someone else, you've slashed them up. You've also then, just as you see someone walking down the street, really, and it was a school friend, I think, of Neil Maxwell's, that they attacked. And that was this James man. And again, for no reason. So they're in a rage, aren't they? They're high, really. They're high, out their heads, really, on it. But again, it's about the mentality of these two now, because you also have now this 19-year-old following along, aren't we, with Neil. Neil can't do anything on his own. He likes to have a little posse with him, and usually they are younger kids and stuff that he can influence. And listen, this Pearson was 19, yes, he was probably on some drugs, and he was known to have hallucinations and different things like that. Now, whether that was through a mental health illness that he had previously, or whether that was drug induced, it's unclear. It's unclear, but as we look at his defences, I don't think it still becomes actually more clear. I don't think there's any history of it, so it's probably drug induced, psychotic episodes and stuff that this boy was having. When you're taking spice and you're taking all these different things, this is what's going to happen. So I think it was shortly after 7 a.m. that Lee Cooper and 2 other men arrived in the street, armed with hammers and a pole and a vacuum cleaner pipe. Right, so they were what we would call tooled up, right? They were tooled up. So now we think, okay, right, Neil Maxwell's been putting out that he's going to slash this man's face and God knows what else. The man has now turned up into the street, tooled up with certain different things. I think, and then after emerging from the house, Maxwell and Cooper began, I suppose, saying, come on then, do this. They were sort of facing up to each other. But something had to give. In the end, something had to give. And what happened was, then, I think it just erupted. It was just I think Cooper headbutted Maxwell. This is what sort of people were saying, knocking him into the car and then kicking him. After the standoff, Maxwell took a weapon, and it was probably most likely the hammer that Cooper had brought to the himself, and chased Mr. Cooper down the street. He then knocked him down after that to the ground, hitting him and slicing his face and body, and that's when also Luke joined in. So now we have 2 people onto 1. So now we have a street fight that's erupted in this street in front of these people, in front of a horrific, looking at a horrific crime taking place here, because it just got worse and worse and worse. We've now got people fighting in the street. They had a Stanley knife involved in this. You also had knuckle dusters. A TV stand actually was taken off from the side of the street. Now, when you look at this program and you look at this street and this estate, there's also lots of furniture and stuff just being left around. Really, there's lots of stuff. And what Maxwell did then, Neil Maxwell, was pick up a very heavy TV stand and started to smash. As Lee Cooper was lying on the ground, he started to smash into his head with this TV stand. It was a very heavy TV stand. Now, he was also stripped naked, and he sustained more than 100 injuries to his really multiple skull fractures, really. So, he was hit with a hammer, he was hit with a TV stand, he was sliced up, he was stripped naked to embarrass him and everything else. And the thing is with Neil Maxwell, he believed that, I suppose, well, I'll get another couple of years for it, because this is what's always happened. and the mentality of this man, even after doing this, and people were screaming for this to stop. They were screaming, they were horrified at what was going on in, you know, a community that may be 90% unemployed, not through fault of their own, but through the, you know, circumstances of the area they live in and stuff like this, had to then witness this sort of thing going on in front of their children. It was horrific, this crime. Really, the injuries to this man were horrific, that were inflicted by two men, one aged 40 at the time and one aged 19, saying, one of them, that, you know, I didn't mean to do it. Well, you know, this is where now, as the defence comes in, it's very difficult, isn't it, when you have witnesses like this. And now we come on to a bit, and I'll show you now, as they are arrested for this crime, because don't forget, Lee Cooper, after this attack, didn't die until 10:30 a.m. So that I think this attack started on Lee, or they started a fight together at around 7 a.m. in the morning, and by 10:30 a.m. that morning, Lee Cooper was dead of really multiple injuries, and we had two men then being arrested. Really, for GBH, it would have come down to, as Neil Maxwell would have assumed that would happen. He'd go and spend another couple of years in prison, you know, get fed, watered, everything, and be released out. So have a look at this CCTV footage and see, first of all, when Lee is only thought to have been injured, right? They think he's alive, and at that point he was alive when they were first arrested, and how Neil Maxwell talks to the police and tries to justify what he's done. I mean, listen, when you're looking at it from a defence and a prosecution's point of view, the defence would have had an extremely hard time to put up a defence for this, to tell the truth, because as Maxwell was in custody and he's telling the officers, well, of course, you know, I would have sliced him up. I mean, he needed a good hiding. Don't you think he needed a good hiding? He deserved what he got. You know, he's lucky I didn't slit his throat and kill him. That's the first part of the CCTV footage from inside the police station when he was arrested for probably GBH. But within a few hours, while he's sitting in a cell in the police station waiting to be interviewed and everything else, Lee Cooper died. And then they go back in and they tell him about Lee Cooper, and his whole persona changes. He now knows that he is up for a murder charge, and so is Luke Pearson.
Lovely.
I think I've just done you as a bit of a bad word.
What's that?
Yeah, that lad who's in hospital. He's just assaulted someone else, where you from.
Alright.
So it's saved you as a child. But me made it serious.
Maxwell, can we do that one time a little bit? It's just licking on there. 517 love. Big 4 this year. Cheers, mate, that sound. I was told that this was going to be alright, but he got a good eye in you, and he deserved it, and I'm proud I did it.
Everything that you feel here,
It's alright, I'm proud I did it. He got a good eye in you for pinching my brother's motorbike, but what I did, when the guy hit the floor, I left him. He tried to crack me with a monkey wrench, I walked away. I did what I needed to do. I whacked him, bust his face. When he got on the ground, I got him back up. I said, don't ever pinch my brother's bike again, no. And that's what I did. Is that fair enough? Attempted murder. It was a bloody chicken scratch. He's lucky I didn't cut his foot.
This morning you were arrested on suspicion of attempt murder, weren't you? Yeah. Right, you're now being further arrested on suspicion of murder. You do not have to say anything, mind it's under caution. You don't have to say anything, whether it be how many offences, do not mention when questioned, something which you later rely on the court, and you do say you'll be given evidence, alright? Do you understand the caution, yeah?
Just so you know, further authorised detention on that arrest.
Well,
Okay? So we can interview you about the allegation in an interview. We recorded then.
So what's happened? Some guys died. Right. Okay.
Thank you very much.
So now let's go on to the trial, because now we know, doesn't, you know, what can they do? These people, really, what can you do? You've now killed a man, right? Whether he had turned up with a hammer and everything else of other people, you have then come out of your property and done whatever you've done with you. Chased him down the street. You have actually murdered someone on the streets in front of people with many, many witnesses. You've gone into a police station on your arrest. You've bragged about it, really, you know, saying that you was going to, you know, he's lucky you didn't slit his throat and all this sort of stuff, which will come back to hit you in the arse, mate, when you are now in a courtroom where this is all going to be shown. Plus the only footage that can't be shown on here, because Lee Cooper's murder was filmed on CCTV and it is way too graphic to be shown as part of any crime. And I think that's actually been a bit suppressed, I think, by the court because of the graphic nature of that attack. But every part of Lee Cooper's attack, right up until really the last blow, was caught on CCTV. So there wasn't much that a defence team really could do apart from say that they didn't mean to kill him. It was just, you know, manslaughter, right? So that was part of it. With Luke's case, he went diminished responsibility. I'll tell you now, that didn't work, because really, as I've said, if it maybe had been on the one kill, you know, the one attack which ended in the death of Lee Cooper, he may have had a chance with that because he had hallucinations and stuff. But also, you can't claim to have mental health unless you have a history of it, really. And drug-induced stuff like this that may only last seconds, or, you know, as long as the drug will last, is not enough as a defence. So he was also, both of them were charged with murder, even though they both pleaded not guilty to murder, and Maxwell pleaded to manslaughter, and Luke then pleaded diminished responsibility. Now, I think when we talk about the mentality of this man, as I've said before, this Maxwell, when he was in court, he was, you know, he's cocksure of himself, right? He is. And you can see this if you've ever seen him on this TV show. But he said he stepped into the witness box months and months later. Don't forget, if you look at the CCT, which you have, you will see there's no remorse on this man at all for what he did to Lee Cooper, let alone what the attacks of the other people that he actually had also admitted and pled guilty to for them as well. But he steps in this box and claimed that he had amnesia due to the drug use, saying that I went berserk, I just lost it, so instantaneous loss of control. So it's something that he didn't remember doing, he just done it, and when it was all over he remembered it, which is not a thing you can do when you've also attacked two people shortly before you've attacked Lee Cooper. Also that you've sent threatening texts to say that you're going to slice him up, really, slit his throat. Also, when you've gone into a police station and you have been arrested for GBH charge, or a suspected GBH charge, that you are so blatant in explaining what you've done and trying to justify what you've done, and hoping these officers are going to agree with you on what you've done. This all comes back to bite you when you're in court. So that manslaughter charge would not have worked at all. It was murder because you said, you know, well, he's lucky, isn't he, that I didn't slit his throat. So your amnesia wasn't there when you was talking about this and doing this stuff before, but it happens to be amnesia, you know, or short-term amnesia when you walk into a courtroom and stand, you know, put on the stand, and this is your, I can't really remember. I just went berserk. That's all I can remember. No, that's just not the case. So he did apologise to his victim's family, claiming that he felt disgraced and gutted for the lad's family. Right? And then he said, whatever happens, I deserve to get, basically, he's actually, he's talking to he's talking to this judge and the, you know, jury and stuff, now with remorse, now with this, and he's also saying to the judge about Luke don't give him as long time as you're giving me. It wasn't the lad's fault, it was my fault. I encouraged it and stuff. But the boy was 19 at the time of when he did these crimes, and this influence from early on from Maxwell, I think, should have been took into some more consideration to tell you than what it was in this case. I'm not justifying what Luke done at all, but I think when we look at this man and we look at how he did influence younger people, this man was nearly double the age of Luke when you think about it at this time. You know, had he given him a lot of drugs and stuff? We don't know, but no jury was going to take it, and no judge. They literally dismissed everything to do with being lenient on Luke for his part in these crimes, and he did receive 24 years in prison for the murder of Lee Cooper. And with Neil Maxwell, he received 30 years in prison for his part of it. But it's about when you think about this Neil Maxwell, even in a cult, he is saying to the judge, thumbs up, mate, yep, I deserve it, yep, cheers, yep. You know, give me the lot. You know, the mentality of this man, even being sentenced, really was a shock at the way that he spoke, and really thought that, you know, trying to act hard and stuff. You've just been sentenced to 30 years, and he tells the judge, cheers, mate. Cheers, mate. Cheers. I mean, I'd shit myself, wouldn't you? Really. But do I think that Neil Maxwell deserves 30 years? Yes. Yes, I do. Absolutely. I think he does. I think he deserves probably a lot. I don't think this man should have been out earlier in the crimes that he'd also done previously to that. But listen, whether he'd killed Lee Cooper then, or not been able to, because he was still kept in prison for his other crimes that he had committed, and we'd been harsher on his sentencing, at some point Neil Maxwell would have killed somebody. He just would have. He really would have. And it was unfortunate, really, that it was Lee Cooper that got in his way on that day. But someone would have always died, I think, at the hands of Neil Maxwell, because of the mentality of the man. There was no way. He was always going to spend the rest of his life in prison, and it was just Neil Cooper's, I think, wrong place, wrong time, really. And also to provoke that crime by, you know, the lifestyle that these people were leading and stuff. Someone is always, aren't they, going to get injured when you turn up at someone's house with weapons or whatever else, or you're sending threatening messages. People, I think, like Maxwell, and would have always had to react. Remember, he was the king of the kids, the king of the street. He ran that street. You're going to do as you're told and stuff. He couldn't have let that go. It was always going to end bad. Always going to end bad. So this has been the Killers of Benefit Street. And we can talk a little bit about Benefit Street, because if many of you come from across the world and you wouldn't understand what this Benefit Street sort of fly on the wall program, it was, you know, what it was really about. You know, I think I may have watched a few episodes. I don't know if I've ever watched this episode of this boy in it. You know, but as I say, you know, it's it was eye-opening. Really, it's actually an award-winning. I think it was one of the highest-rated shows that Channel 4 done around this time. A lot of the people in Benefit Street, some of what their stars of Benefit Street, had a lot of backlash from the public. Also, actually, Neil Maxwell had a lot of backlash, and so did the programme, over his portrayal of his drug use and stolen goods and everything that was put on this show. It made the police look a bit stupid, really, when you think, because it was so blatantly put out there. I think Ofcom also looked into the show because of the complaints, because when these people who were stars of this show had lots of things written about them that they didn't like, right? Ofcom looked into it because they said, really, well, the people said that they wasn't portrayed the way they thought they was going to be portrayed. I don't know how you can be, you know, it says it in the name, doesn't it? Benefit Street. It's about your life on benefits and stuff, and how you live your life normally is how you're portrayed. Ofcom rejected that there was any issues with Channel 4 had done anything wrong with this program and portrayed them in a different way. But when we're talking about society and we're talking about people that do reality shows and stuff, there is going to be backlash, right? Because before that we had the Philpott case, didn't we? 27 kids and growing, and then he wanted a bigger council house, so he ended up killing his 6 kids really in a fire, not meaning to kill them but to kill them, and this married, as well, is the girlfriend married done it, or the wife married done it, didn't she? And so there was a lot of backlash coming from that, and then all of a sudden you've got this benefit street coming out with people living on benefits, as I said, in an area really of Birmingham, that's where it was, portraying everyday life. And there's either people that love that sort of show that want to look at how the other half live, or or you have people that are absolutely shocked and horrid by the reality of how some people live. They don't want to see it. They don't want to be reminded of the poverty that was going around at that time. As with benefit changes at that time, you had universal credits coming in and stuff, and a lot of people were losing their benefits and stuff like this. So there's lots of issues that was going on within this show. And that's sort of what it was about. I think they brought out then Immigration Street was the next one that they brought out. I don't know if that done very well at all. But this was the sort of show that this person was on. And the area, as I said, that they lived in at that time, and I don't think it's much different now, to tell you the truth, this area with the amount of people that's unemployed. Listen, we've got terrible issues with the police at the moment. We've got terrible issues with our councils. We've got terrible issues with our benefit system. We've got terrible issues in this country. We've got a government that don't know they're coming from left and right, what they're doing about. I don't know who the Prime Minister is at the minute, because we've had so many. But no one's really concentrating on the issues of people who live in these deprived areas of our country. Now, when we have deprived areas and we have no employment, you're going to have crime. You are. Now, whether that's antisocial behaviour, drug use, stolen goods, all this sort of stuff, that's what you're going to have. Crime rate will go up. As the economy goes up, cost of living goes up, electricity's just gone up, everything's just gone up. What do you think is going to happen with a crime rate? This was in 2018. Things are a lot worse now than they was then. But when we talk about these people that go on these shows, these reality shows, and they try and save their life because they think, yes, it's a good thing, they're going to be famous, I might get something from it, and I think some did have, you're always going to have backlash. But these programs are never going to hire people who do not make the news, who do not, have big personalities, are they? They're not after just your everyday people sitting there on the dole, getting by in life quiet. They are looking for the X factor in that's going to bring them, views to their TV program. That's what these programs are about. So they do come across, I think, as a bit exploitive of people that are living on benefits and stuff, right? Because most people I know that are working full time are probably just as hard up or worse off than some people that are on benefits. So if we're going to portray programs about our society in England, we should be honest and open about it and truthful about it, and not just segregate one set of people and say benefit street. It's quite a name that's quite derogatory to me, because there's many people on benefits, many people in this area that was on benefits that didn't have this lifestyle or do any of the lifestyles that this Neil Maxwell did. These were normal people trying to survive life, get a job, in an area where there just wasn't any. There just wasn't any. Times are going to get worse, and I think these sort of crimes, listen, we're going to see these crimes every day, aren't we really? These are everyday crimes when you look at it. What makes this crime different, which stands out, which why I'm doing it, is because the bloke came from Benefit Street. If he hadn't have come from Benefit Street, this crime would not have made the news as it did. It wouldn't have. This made national news. But if it had just been Neil Maxwell, Luke Pearson kills Lee Cooper, would that have made the national news? No. Would it have made my show? No, it really wouldn't. It made it because this man was portrayed as a lovable rogue. But underneath all that, this man was a nasty piece of work. which abused women, abused people, abused his society that he lived in. He really took this area down, really. When you really think about when these, you know, people are trying to live normal lives and you're doing this, you haven't done this, you know, area any favours, really. You really haven't. And I think Neil Maxwell's where he belongs, and actually so is Luke. They deserve to be there because of what they done and how they done it and why they done it. So thank you for watching, and until the next time, bye bye.